So Exploration Tapestry is a series of full engagement programs with our local biodiversity expert, featured in our current exhibition, Sensory Odyssey, into the heart of our living world. And we are very honored to have Dr. Shawn Lum today, tropical rainforest ecologist and former president of Nature Society Singapore, to learn more about the fascinating flora that calls our nature reserves home. So without further ado, I'm just going to pass my mic to Dr. Shawn to start his presentation.
Thank you, Hudin. I just thank you very much for coming. I'm Shawn Lum, and I'll just be sharing for about, half an hour, a little bit more, and then we have a little hands-on. We'll test everybody's, no, not test everybody, it sounds too lecturish. We'll acquaint ourselves with different kinds of some of these forest trees. So first, I need to thank Hudin and Jing for putting up with me and the my failure to reply in time in a timely way, and they're thinking, what's happening with this guy? So I will just maybe share a little bit about. So I'm a little biased towards a particular type of forest. These are these primary forests, and this is an example. This is not from Singapore. This is from Gunung Arong in Johor, which is near Mersing. But it has all the characteristics of our forest, and it's very similar to the Bukit Timah Nature Reserve type forest. That's one. And secondly, I don't only want to maybe talk about what is Singapore like today, but maybe thinking about if we have the efforts of the national effort called the Forest Restoration Action Plan. That's one. But I think if we as just people in the community get involved to imagine not only what is, but what could be. I think that may be fun. So I better watch the time, because as some of my former students here can attest, I tend to forget about the time. Now these things that look like broccoli or cauliflower, anytime you go to a hill in the peninsula or in Singapore, especially near the coast, you can see what look like, it's basically like cauliflower on a stick. It looks like that. And this is a tree called Seraya, or Shorea curtisii. Now apparently it's been renamed as Rubro Shorea curtisii, but let's just call it the Seraya. The Seraya belongs to a particular family, a group of plants, in the same way you might have, say, a citrus family, like orange and pomelo and lemon and lime and kumquat. They all belong to this, what else is in there? Curry leaf, all in that same family. Or you might have a hibiscus family of flowers. This is called the Seraya or Dipterocarp family. So I'll be talking about those for the next, say, 20 minutes. And why? Well, because I kind of like them, but also because I think they're so important, so central to the way Asian forests work. So it's not just a Singapore Asian forest, but essentially any forest from Sri Lanka, north to India, across Myanmar, Thailand, all the way to New Guinea. These are for much of that range, this Seraya or Meranti family dominate the forests, and they're beautiful. Look at, that is, I've even forgotten where that is. This is the main range of the mountains of Malaysia, but all of this is what's called a dipterocarp forest. Because it's a forest type that's really dominated by a particular group of plants. Sinwi, correct me if I make a mistake, okay, or anything. And they're just magnificent. But here's our own example. This is Bukit Timah Nature Reserve. And again, can you see the cauliflower crowns? They're not cauliflower, they look like cauliflower. This is the Shorea curtisii or Seraya. And this is the biggest patch of original forest that still is left in Singapore. There are others, of course, but this is the largest. And so this is what I want to talk about. So they're called diptero. Literally, di means two, ptero, like pterodactyl, means winged, and carpus means fruit, so it's two-winged fruit. But then you say, wait a minute, these have more than two. This one has three, this has three, that one has five. This has two long ones. The reason why, it's just the naming convention. The first person who named them formally happened to have a fruit type that had two wings, so we called it the two-winged fruit, Dipterocarpus. Later on, they found that related plants have more wings or different numbers of wings. But this is an amazing family of plants. And again, here are some of many of these are the most valuable timber species. So this is why for many, many years, Asia was the biggest exporter of tropical timber. Sadly, that timber didn't stay here for development here. It went everywhere else. So Chengal, one of the most valuable timbers, very slow growing, very hard to sustainably manage. And then this is the Meranti. That's the one that became plywood and sent all over the world. And then there are other things like kapur, this is kuruing. So they're just the most valuable group of timber species, probably in the world, because they're big, they're relatively easy to log, and they have everything from fast-growing, relatively soft timber to very slow-growing and very hard, durable timber. And they're actually quite easy to identify, and I will show you later. And I better remember the time, so I'll show you later. But what you would look for is, I don't know if you can see from the back, but you look at these little veins, and then you'll see these tiny connecting veins between them. That will be the giveaway. So easy to say. I hope I can demonstrate it for real. But there's certain differences. Like this one is wavy. That's the thing called kuruing. This is a Meranti. This one, the veins actually go to the side, and rather than, you see the veins go to the side and they touch the margin. Here they go towards the margin, they decide to turn back. So they're looping type veins. So that's how we can tell. And I think I have a few examples of them with me. They also have sometimes very beautiful flowers. Like this one looks like candy stripes and fragrant. This is the kuruing or Dipterocarpus, two different species. This was found by a friend of mine, Mr. Aidi, who worked at NParks in 1995. So, I mean, for some of you who were not born in 1995, that seems like a long time ago, but I was very much around in 1995, so it just seems like yesterday. But when Aidi discovered this, again, it's a giant tree, like 3 giant trees on the side of what's called the Mekrichi Nature Trail. So thousands of people run by it every day. They were running. Maybe hundreds of thousands had walked along this trail before 1995. And then Mr. Aidi finds this giant tree. And it turns out that it had not been described from Singapore before, only in 1995. And then when they looked some more, there was only one other place it's found. That's in Sarawak, but turned up in Singapore. So, that just goes to show how even these giant trees in the rainforest, sometimes they're just understudied. Maybe because if you look in the forest, the leaves are so high, most of us, it's too tall, I'm not going to bother looking. But, and this one is the tree called kapur. Kapur is really interesting. It's called Borneo camphor. And I think I have some samples of this. No, I don't have samples of this, but this produces a resin. And so not only are these ecologically important and economically important, they're culturally interesting too. So, but the resin of these dipterocarps, they make a valuable, that you can use it for varnishing furniture, for sealing boats and things like that. And damar would be the generic name for this kind of resin. This damar of Borneo camphor was apparently so valuable that it was collected by tribes in what is now Sarawak, Indonesia, on the island of Borneo. And they even had a whole culture around this. Like, I don't know why, but men would collect it, and they would go in parties looking for these giant trees that might have some of the resin accumulated inside the trunk. Meaning to get at it, you have to kind of cut the tree open, so it's highly destructive and not very easy. But there are all kinds of things. So like the night before, the men would gather in not a hunting party, a collecting party, I suppose. And then if they had a good omen, like they dreamt of a hornbill or something like this, then they would go. But if there's a bad omen, like somebody passed gas or something, apparently they didn't go. It was just because it was so, such a, but that resin from the Tang Dynasty period, so over 1,000 years ago, was being traded from Borneo to China and Korea because it could be burned like incense. It was useful for. So this tree, that's why you can have 1,000-year-old vases in the middle of the Borneo jungle by people who'd never seen a foreigner, because these probably were being traded from the river, then up these remote rivers, and following the barter trade, rainforest products for ceramic, things, So anyway, like I said, I get carried away. There's the kapur. These are tall trees. They can be 70, 80 meters tall. And recently, as in very recently, less than 10 years ago, people in Sabah, Danang Valley, found that some of these dipterocarps grew 95 meters tall. The tallest ones in Malaysia maybe 60, 70 meters, but they found almost 100-meter tall trees of this Meranti family in Sabah. These are the tallest tropical trees that approach the tallest in the world, the redwoods of California. So, as you might have guessed, anybody who was primary 6, you learned about dispersal of fruits. Do you remember? And then the shuttlecock dispersed by wind. The classic example is the Meranti family, the Shorias and their relatives. They are wind dispersed, but the wind they're heavy. They're very heavy. So it has to be an awfully strong wind to actually blow them any distance. So most of them just fall straight down, most of them. And a few, once in a while, there's a gust of wind will carry it. So I remember being once on Fraser's Hill, just looking at the forest, and the wind picked up, and I saw this Meranti fruit just spin past me, like really fast. That's the only time I've ever seen one go any distance. Usually you look and they just come straight down. Very beautiful. I would say one of the miracles of nature in Asia. Here's another interesting thing, and I don't want to get too technical, but right? I mean, this is not, obviously not Singapore. This is Japan, and this is the cherry blossom or sakura. Now, the wonderful thing about spring is you can go to a temperate climate, temperate country, and every spring, the world just lights up. Maybe these trees were leafless and they start to make a few leaves, and then all the flowers come out, and it's gorgeous and it's beautiful. But actually, that's not because the trees are desperate, but that's because they really have a short window to make the fruits before the cold weather comes back. So at the earliest opportunity, they flower, and they all flower together. Any tree that waits too long will not get the fruits mature in time to overwinter. And so that's the reason. We perceive it as something beautiful and gorgeous, which it is, but it's a survival strategy for these plants. And so here's a alpine meadow, again, so beautiful. It's June, and it's like the nature is putting on a show for us. Well, it is, but it's actually more the plant's attempt to survive by blooming as early as possible. Not too early, otherwise it might frost and kill off the flowers, but not too late, because then there's not enough time to. And so that's why you get these sequences of blossoms. So look at that. But I like my tropical flowers. Now, this is, so since I've been working in forests, which is since the 1980s, those dates, those are the years where our forests have flowered. So I've been doing this for almost 40 years now, but they've only flowered about 6 times in kind of any sort of large display. 1987, 1990, at one period, 96 to 2005, almost 10 years, 9 years, the trees in the forest did not flower. And that, so then you ask, well, why is that? That just seems like kind of it's like the plants don't want to survive or something. And here's these Meranti flowers. It turns out, so the theory is that these soils of the Asian forests are actually quite poor in nutrients. So to actually invest all those nutrients to make all of these fruits is very expensive. I mean, it costs a lot to get those nutrients. And it just takes a few wild boar and squirrels to just go onto a tree and wallop all the fruits. And then that's all that effort, wasted. And so the theory goes that these trees, by waiting, looking for a signal that comes very seldom. So you go 3 years without fruiting, 5 years without fruiting, 12 years sometimes without fruiting. That means that the permanent population of these big animals that eat seeds can only be fairly low. And when the food is scarce, they don't actually have lots of offspring. So the population remains low. And so in those years, so for example, in 1996, that was a giant fruiting. So was 1990. Those years, the fruits come in such quantity because the trees have been accumulating energy for all those years. So many fruits come down, and it really just literally covers the forest floor. So can you imagine being in McRitchie Forest in 1996? You would be just like a carpet of Meranti fruits, just magnificent. All the wild boar in the forest can come and eat all they want, but they will not be, it's like a buffet, all you can eat, and they keep topping it up. So a few seeds will survive, enough for regeneration to happen. Studies have found that if there's 1 or 2 trees that fruit, all the seeds get preyed on. So there just seems to be an advantage in everybody flowering together, and swamping any potential sort of animals that would eat them. So they call this the predator satiation hypothesis. To date, it's the one that's most typically shared as one of the explanations. However, if you go to places like India, where these dipterocarps occur, and there's a dry season every year, the plants actually will flower every year. So there's a little bit of a potential flaw in the argument. So again, here it's been a while since these trees have flowered. So I've been going to Bukit Timah and the Botanic Gardens on and off for the past few weeks, and a few plants, they have, it's like they get anxiety. They're all waiting. They have all energy stored. So once in a while, it's just like at a race. Well, like when Shanti Pereira won her medal, they had to run it twice, right? Because the first one, there was a false start. And so that runner got disqualified, unfortunately for her. But so some of these trees false start also. They're waiting, and then they perceive a signal. And so you may ask, what is the signal? And it turns out that, let me just show the flowers, nicer to look at. It turns out the signal is something because so it's not the day length and it's not temperature because it goes warm and cold every year. The day lengths will change but come back to the same day length, exact night and day every year. So it cannot be a signal that's annual. So it's believed that it's exactly 4 weeks of no rain. Not 3, not 2, but 4. And then once you hit 1 month of no rain, then all the flower buds start to develop. It seems like a reliable trigger. And so when we've had these, I put these asterisks, both years had a very intense dry period, if you remember, but only 3 weeks. And so what happened was some of the trees false started. They were waiting for that, but some held back and some went for it, and there wasn't much regeneration actually. So it seems to be 4 weeks of dry and cool nights. That seems to be the trigger, and that length of dry period doesn't happen every year, and so that's why it's this rare signal, and it turns out to be just nice for these trees. What concerns some of us is that, as with this climate change, we will probably have more frequent drier dry periods, wetter wet periods. And the worry is, will this impact the regeneration of our forests? I forgot to add that when these trees flower, so does everything else. So the whole forest goes together. There are a few things that in the forest every year you can find, but to have what's called a general flowering, the whole forest just goes and does their thing. That's very seldom. The rule of thumb is there are some years where the durian price is very low. That's because the durians have flowered heavily. Those are the years usually the forest will also flower. So like, I don't know if like last year the price of durians were down. In Malaysia, the Meranti flowered. So they generally tend to, so durians still have that jungle heritage a little bit. So even though they can flower every year, they still respond to those extra dry years. So it's really interesting. So I'm actually quite a lazy botanist. I know that there's a tree in the Botanic Gardens, so I'll show you this box. There's something, I mean, this tree is called Meranti malantai. I guess lantai just means the floor, right? But I don't know why they call it malantai. But this tree, this species is always the first one to flower, always the first. And then if it flowers, then everything else will flower. So a lot of my colleagues are very diligent. They go to the forest, they look with their binoculars. I just, once in a while, go to, if it gets a little bit dry, and it's usually around Chinese New Year. That's the dry period. If it's like 2 weeks of no rain, then I just take a bus, go to the botanics, and then look for this one tree. And if it's in flower, then I know, okay, ready to do some research this year. Okay. But it turns out that this is the first. Every time they flower, whether it's 5 years interval, 12 years interval, there's always this same sequence. The first species goes, and the second one goes. It feels like they all queue up behind the first species. Maybe this is one last bit of trivia. These plants, these flowers, are pollinated by small beetles and sometimes moths, and they're in the thousands that they flower. So the theory is that early in the flower, they flower over about 6 weeks. The population of the pollinators are real tiny, so they can reproduce very quickly. So once the first species flowers, the population of the pollinating insect starts to grow, and they're kind of like this army of pollinators. They just go from tree to tree, species to species over those 6 weeks. Sorry to get too academic here. If you eat durian, there's so many varieties, right? The D24, XO, D13, Maoshan Wang, all those red prawn. And even from the same tree, the different fruits might actually have different flavor, which makes it so fun to eat durian for those of you who like it. There are other species where the flavor is quite uniform. If you think about mangosteen, I've never heard of any sort of mangosteen varieties, and they all kind of taste the same. It turns out that mangosteen, they don't need to be pollinated. They're kind of like these seedless grapes. They just produce fruits on their own. But those fruits have seeds in them. So every mangosteen really, they're like those. They clone each other. They clone themselves. So basically every mangosteen is a female plant, and it doesn't need the pollen really. And so that's why I think that partly explains the relatively uniform taste. They're all the same line. Okay, so the part that I wanted to say was this first species is very important. The one that not important because it tells me when I can do work, but it's because it is the species that helps build up the pollinator population. And so in a way you could say, well, this species kind of sacrifices its seed production because the pollinator population is still small. But it turns out, the research by Malaysian colleagues, now in the late 70s, found that this first species is like a mangosteen in that it doesn't need a pollinator. It just starts to clone itself. So it doesn't even need the pollinators, but it helps build up the population. And then all these other species in a way, you could say they're kind of clever, that they wait for the first species, then the population of pollinators is built up, then they start to flower. So it's really kind of an interesting, how does nature do this? I don't know. Now this is this tree I look for, the Meranti malantai, at the botanics. And you can see here, it's a bit brown. Those are the fruits. And one tree might have tens of thousands. Really, they rain down. If you stand underneath, and if the wind blows, and they all start coming down. Again, I would say there's maybe a couple of miracles of nature that you have, like if there was a bucket list of what to see, one might be the spawning of the coral, every full moon in April, then they all reproduce. Or another one would be these migratory birds, they go. And I would say this is on top of not top of the list, I'm biased. They're on the list. They should be what everybody should see. You see all the carcasses of the smashed Moranti fruits over here? They've been to the drain and everything. They are edible, actually. And if you go to Sarawak, some species, you can roast the fruit, roast the seeds, and press an oil. So if you go to, say, Sarawak, sometimes they sell like a little piece of bamboo. They call it Moranti butter. It's actually the oil from the fruits, and it's used to like flavor rice, and it's supposed to be quite nice. It's also used last time as a substitute for cocoa butter. So it would be sold to all those big chocolate manufacturer and everything. So there still is a wild collected dipterocarps. Now, let me fast forward a little bit. This is just to show that this idea of the theory of why they flower when they do. Now here is a really bizarre one. So our tropical forests are known to be very diverse, like hundreds of species. If you go to, say, Sarawak, some of those might have species diversity, kind of like the Amazon, 1,000 different kinds of trees in a small piece of forest. If you went up to now the ArtScience Museum is large, but it's not in terms of square meters. It's not that big. If you had landed property that big, it would be very big. But as in an absolute sense, it's not very big. But you could go to a similar sized area in Sarawak, and there really would be 500, 600, 700 species of trees on a tiny little footprint. That's how diverse they are. But if you go, and I don't know why, but if you go to what are called peat swamps, so these are waterlogged forests where the soil down here is not like soil that is derived from rocks, but organic soil from leaves that have accumulated over thousands of years. So it's low in nutrients, it's very acidic, waterlogged. When you hit those conditions, you notice how the canopy is flat? They look beautiful, by the way. It's just a flat canopy because the canopy is only made of one species, and it's a species of Moranti. In Sarawak, they call this alan. Why, I have no idea. But this is one of the few examples in tropical rainforests where the diversity, this hyperdiversity, gets reduced just to one dominant species. It's a shoria. Maybe last thing I should say about these shoria. Sorry, you came to learn about the forest and you learned about Moranti. Some of you may have heard of this term called the wood wide web. Have you? Some of you have heard this? Okay, so I'll just quickly explain for those who might be a new term. It was actually some work that was first highlighted by a professor named Suzanne Simard in British Columbia, so in Canada. And for several reasons, the idea was so almost like science fiction. And she was a woman in a very male-dominated field, forest science. People didn't believe her for a long time. But she found that, so there's a certain kind of fungus. It's just called, it's called ectomycorrhiza, but there's two kinds of root fungus. Almost all plants have root fungus, but there's a certain type, the not so common type, where the fungus wraps around the roots. Most types, the fungus penetrates the roots. This one wraps around the roots. That's not very common. It's found in oak trees, pine trees, and a few groups. But it turns out that those trees that have that type of fungus, the fungus make a network in the ground which help extract nutrients. So that's, okay, all root funguses do this, but this type of root fungus not only extract from this wide network nutrients from the soil, they actually interlink. So if we were all, say, for example, in British Columbia, we were pine trees, each of us, each standing our ground like this, our roots we would actually be connected, physically connected through this network of fungus, which is called the wood wide web. And people have found, there's some controversy over this, but it's really interesting. Let's say, for example, I was a giant mother tree, and many of you were my offspring, let's say. And I got struck by lightning. So in my last dying moments, again, this is not universally accepted, but it seems to be, and I'm just dying, but I've got all this energy stored up in my tree trunk, sugar and proteins and everything. It's been alleged that this dying mother tree in those last few moments can actually actively pump those nutrients to the other trees, rather than just kind of die like that, actually just to increase the survival of the other trees. And let me just, so for example, so now let's say, for example, that those of you who have currently have a mask, let's say, in this, you were actually my direct offspring. The rest were like nieces and nephews. Yeah. So the mother tree evidently can recognize direct offspring from nieces and nephews, and will distribute the energy to the whole network, but preferentially give more to offspring. Which is, again, it's not, this is still needs to be confirmed more generally, but this is an incredible, this has changed the way we think about forests, from all these trees competing against each other to actually maybe cooperating at some level. Now, the thing I wanted to say is the external fungus that is found in pine trees and oak trees and a few families, it also turns out to be found in these Maranti family. It's one of the few tree species, and you don't find this type of fungus dominating in the Amazonian forest or the African rainforest or the Australian rainforest, but it's in the Asian forest because of the fact that this Maranti or Dipterocarp family have that type of fungus. We don't know exactly, do they communicate the same way? So again, it could be other kinds of communication. Let's say insect starts to eat one leaves of a tree. You send out a distress signal. Maybe it goes through the air, maybe it goes through the network of roots, but the rest of us respond by increasing our defensive chemicals to guard ourselves. So there's all this crazy stuff that seems to be happening, which is only being recently. But let me just close here. I as much as I love mangroves also. That's another forest type, right? So that's really amazing. Some research, as in the past 20 years, have found that all of these trees. Again, that's another miracle, right? So let me find a piece of wood. So that wood flooring, if that was wood flooring, those came from trees. Now, trees make wood in the most amazing way. Wood is just the sugar stuck together as a polymer in different ways, right? So you can take sugar and then you stitch it together in one way, you get starch. You stitch it together another way, you get cellulose. And then you put it together in another way and you get something called lignin. And lignin is the stuff that makes wood really hard. So a piece of wood actually just started out as gas, as carbon dioxide gas. And the tree took it, made sugar, and then stuck it together to make wood. If you weigh a tree, half of the mass is carbon. Half of the mass is carbon. So as much as a tree in a forest can store carbon, apparently the mangroves store more carbon than even trees in the rainforest because they have these giant root systems, and there's a lot of carbon in the soil also. So that's why these mangroves are often referred to as blue carbon, the carbon in trees but found in these swampy habitats. As somebody who loves trees, I find it very sad that people these days talk only about the amount of carbon in a forest, not the species in it or how there are these miraculous things going on. But I guess as conservationists, we sometimes have to convey a message that seems to easily translate to other domains, like business, for example. I mean, I didn't mean that with any facetiousness or anything. And so again, you see the mangrove root systems are huge, and there's a lot of carbon in them. And I think we have a few people in Singapore, Dr. Siti Mariam Yaakob at Conservation International. There's Dan Fries, formerly of NUS. All of these are actually experts in blue carbon. Siti Mariam is actually started the Blue Carbon Institute at Conservation International. Oh, will this play? I don't know. I mean, this is not a tree, obviously. This is archerfish, but oh, it's supposed to be a video. These guys live in the mangroves, and if you've ever seen the archerfish shoot down an insect, they have a groove in the upper jaw, upper palate, and the tongue presses against the upper palate, and then this water comes out. And what's also really cool is as you know, the refractive index of water. The light doesn't travel straight from air to water. It bends, right, because it's different density. So the brain of the archerfish can correct for that difference. So it aims, so it's aiming there, but the insect is actually up there because it's compensating for the bending of the light. That small little brain, it can do lots of amazing things. Okay, there is also what's called freshwater swamp forest. Today, the only place that it's left is in the Nee area. This is near the Mandai Zoo, around the Seletar Reservoir. And it's it's a highly endangered system, not just in Singapore, but everywhere it occurs, because these are often drained and cleared for agriculture. And there were a few, so essentially, like where we are now today, well, we're at the Marina reclaimed land, but if we were up the Kallang or the Singapore River, along the river edges would have been mangrove. So even until they built the Marina Barrage, you could still see mangroves and marine animals inside the Singapore River. It was crazy. Not crazy, but it's really cute to see all of these on the boat quay, all these mangrove species. And there would actually be mangrove plants, like next to Zouk and all of these places, because every day the mangrove fruits would be coming up the Singapore River. And then once you got to the edge of the river, then this type of habitat would have taken over this freshwater swamp. Now, why am I showing NTU? I just wanted, let me just show you in the last couple of minutes, and this basically is just an example of wherever you live. So this is where I work. But wherever you live, so it could be Toa Payoh, Bedok, Tampines, anywhere, Yishun, was before, if we go back far enough, it was a rainforest, for sure. So where you live now, if you could teleport 200 years ago, there were elephants and tigers and maybe a rhinoceros and tapirs and leopards. It would have been, you can't imagine what was once on this island or around this whole region. And if you go to NTU, it's so built up. But I just wanted to show you a few maps. So this is an 1873 map, a 1930 map, and you can see there are all these little hills. Each of these was probably one of those little Bukit Timas with a rainforest on them. It's hard to imagine today. And then the 1930 map, let me see the 1930. Oh, it's 58. Let me fast forward. No disrespect for any NTU graduate here, but this is the 1950 map. So the campus is somewhere around here, but can you see, these are all these different Tengay River, Poyan River, it's all now reservoirs. So, but everywhere along the coast, Kranji, Seletar, all of these were rivers with mangrove along them. So, and you can see the Jurong River, Pandan River, and you can see where, how far the tide would have come. So again, those of you who remember before the Marina Barrage was built, if you went as far as, let's say, on Bukit Timah Road, Coronation Plaza, that's way inland. The tide used to come in and go up and down over there. And if you live near, say, Potong Pasir on the Kallang River, even today, if you look on the sides of the canal, of the Kallang River, there are these round white like scars on the walls of the longkang of the canal. Those are oyster shells because the oysters, rock oysters, were lining the canal everywhere where the tide would come in. So you can imagine there were mangroves everywhere. All this would have been rainforest. And so there's one peculiar part I wanted to show you. Wait, will this one do it? Oh no, it's not doing it. Sorry. Let me show you just one part of NTU. Yeah, I went to a place. It said don't enter, but I went. I was just. So this is on the campus. Amidst all of the landscaped part, there's this tree called tiup tiup. So it's actually a jungle species. It's found everywhere. It probably used to be the most common forest species, no longer, but it's called tiup tiup. And the bats they eat the fruits and they spread them all over the place. A great place to see this, the best place to see this is if you go to Mount Faber, Telok Blangah Hill on the forest of that, where there's a elevated walkway. This is the best place to see this tiup tiup forest. And then I saw this is called the riang riang, or cicada tree. On the middle of the NTU campus, it's actually quite an uncommon species today, but somebody forgot to cut it down, which is great. I love it. This is wonderful. And then you see anywhere in Singapore, anywhere, as long as you don't cut the grass or over manicure, the forest starts to come back. So this is like, for example, a white fig, which is a native species. Again, that's the wonders of the tropical forest. There's birds flying everywhere. Maybe at night, in dusk, 8 o'clock, you start seeing these fruit bats flying around. They're moving seeds around. They will disperse fruits from the forest as they travel around. So even at a vast built-up campus like this, even at Orchard Road, maybe even at the Marina Bay Sands area, as long as they don't cut the grass, you will start to see forest species start to come back. That's the resilience of nature. Dipterocarps won't come back, unfortunately, because they don't spread very far. But what I wanted to show here is, you see, even like here's a bodhi in the middle of this crack on the sidewalk. They come. But the part that I wanted to show was right here near Hall. There's a place called Hall 14. Okay, here. This was a landscape maybe 10 years ago, but somebody forgot to trim the grass, I think. And so what happened was the rainforest came back. This is really one of the most densely built up parts of the campus, but there's a tembusu tree, and then there's this senduduk plant, and all of there's macaranga. All of these are rainforests or regenerating forest species. And then mistletoes, right, parasitic plants. And then this is pitcher plants in the middle of NTU. Pitcher plants, because anywhere where there is poor nutrient soil, a pitcher plant seed, if it arrives, it will grow and it will thrive. You can see there's one pitcher over here, okay? The slender pitcher plant. This is the Singapore rhododendron, the Senduduk Singapore rhododendron. Okay, so let me just go to the last couple of slides then. I just want to draw your attention to one thing. This is a study that we've done at Bukit Timah. My colleagues and I did at the Bukit Timah rainforest. So we've just been monitoring 2 small patches of the forest for 30 years now. 30 years. So since I was about 7 years, no, I'm just kidding. I'm quite old already. Who am I fooling? So we have not lost any species. So the species diversity has remained kind of constant over the past 30 years. But the thing I wanted to show you, and it seems a little bit technical, but look at this column on the right. And so this is the change over the past 20 years. And you'll notice that some species have actually increased quite a bit, like the tree that's called Strelblus elongatus. There's another name for this. The local name is Tampines, as in the Tampines Newtown. And that has increased by almost 40% over 20 years. So it's gotten more common. Even the Soraya, the Meranti, let's see, oh, here we go. It's increased by 20%. 20% more than just 20 years ago in our study area. And there have been a few that have dropped quite a comparable drop. So this plant called the Matakali, the Gynotrochus, I didn't realize that kali is a type of catfish. I only realized, and then I said, oh, of course, because the catfish has a tiny reddish eye, and this one has a tiny red fruit, just like the eye. So people were very observant in our ancestors, very observant. So can you see the numbers are all over the place? So there's some species held constant, but some have increased quite a lot, and some have decreased quite a lot. So then the question becomes, what's driving this? And currently the best answer or hypothesis is that maybe changes in slow and steady changes in rainfall pattern might be responsible. The more drought-sensitive plants could be the ones that are declining, and the ones that are drought-tolerant increasing. Fortunately, there are a few people now doing experiments to confirm this. But then the wider question is, with climate change, how will our forests respond? Are we going to see the loss of a lot of species? Now, there are trees that are perfectly adapted to long dry seasons. The unfortunate thing is that they're 1,000 miles away in Thailand. And so if climate change happened very slowly across centuries, what typically happens is vegetation just migrates across the landscape generation after generation. And so rainforests expand, contract in response to changing weather patterns. But when the climate changes very quickly, the migration can't keep up with the change. And so that's the worry. And then some people say, well, why don't we just take some plants from Thailand and bring it over here? And some people will say, well, that's kind of maybe too drastic. They call this assisted migration, but it's not universally accepted. But the other thing about these rainforests is they're very slow to recover. So there's one trail at Bukit Timah, it's called the Cave Path. One side has original forest, the other side was logged, so it's the regenerated forest. And after 30 years, after 80 years, and the forests literally sit side by side. So you could be in the primary forest, I could be in the secondary forest, and you could look at this, be on this path, and the trees are completely different on either side. So the regeneration is very slow. So if we want to bring back something like original pockets of forest, they need help. They need help. And once you establish them, they're all right. Last thing, maybe the last couple things is, so these dark patches are the original. Why they didn't get cut, I don't know, but I think they were on little hillocks maybe, or they were just kind of troublesome to cut down. So they're left. And McRitchie Reservoir is 160 years old. So all this forest has been left alone for 160 years. And even 160 years later, you can clearly tell which is the original and which is the regenerated. So again, the forest is extremely resilient, but once you disturb it, something will grow back very quickly. But the original forest takes forever to return. So that means there needs to be kind of an active management. Of course, dipterocarp's not the only thing. These are nutmegs of different sorts. But look how big those seeds are, 5 centimeters long fruits. We don't anymore have animals big enough to actually take these seeds and move them around. Again, another question is, well, now we don't have those animals. Are these trees forever kind of fated to not be dispersed and maybe regenerate at lower rates? We don't have, for example, rhinoceros, hornbill. We don't have those, again, gibbons, those big animals. Some work has shown that this is like a little plantain squirrel, and that little squirrel, here are durian seeds, so it's also quite big. These little squirrels might be able, they might have been able to maybe pick up the slack a little bit, sort of step up. They're doing different things. They have no intention of dispersing. They want to eat the seeds, but sometimes they take more than they can eat, so they hide the seeds, and they maybe forget. And then than the regeneration cap. So that's called secondary seed dispersal. So there's amazing resilience in our forests. Of course, the forest's not about trees, it's about the animals, and there's still some wonderful things. Maybe some of you know this bird, the straw-headed bulbul. There's less than 1,000 left in the world. It used to be found in Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, and it's almost gone. A few hundred left, but half of those live in Singapore because we don't trap the birds to put them in cages to sing, because they have a beautiful song. And then, of course, we have the Sunda pangolin, very critically endangered, but again, because maybe we don't hunt so much. Well, we're not supposed to, but we also have lost the tradition. They can thrive if we give it a chance. So I've only spoken about trees and forests, mostly about dipterocarps, but we still have maybe 700 species of trees in our forest. We have 300 species of butterflies, another 300 species of birds, lots of insects. In tiny little pockets of forest, how much appetite have we to have this wildlife kind of right at our doorstep? That's the question. And again, it came to everyone's attention just last week because they took a crocodile which was minding its own business on Marina East, but then it was caught. But I can understand what the wildlife managers, the risk might have been too high. If it's an otter, it's all right, but we're talking about a 2-3 meter crocodile. And so the reality is, people like me welcome this idea of city and nature with all kinds of wildlife, but are we ready as a society for that? And what would it take for us to maybe live in some sort of, if not necessarily harmony, then at least with some sort of understanding with nature, because if we're going to bring back those forests, so that means also bringing back more animals, and we have to be, to welcome that rather than lock ourselves in our flats because we don't want to encounter wildlife. I have a last thing, and so again, Hudin, Jiang, thank you very much. Thank you all. Thanks to all of you for devoting a Saturday afternoon to come to this wonderful venue. But one last thing. I have some leaves here. So some of these, this is like a shoria, right? So, some of them are a thing called kuruing. Let's see if this is another shoria. So you can see they can be very large or they can be relatively small, but they have a similar pattern on the leaf. So I'd like for you to see if you can work out which is the shoria and which are different ones. And maybe I can put them on the table here, or we can put them in the center. The value of this is if you see such a leaf on the forest floor, and this can be anywhere, in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, India, Thailand, anywhere in the Asian tropics, if you see this type of leaf on the forest floor, then it means you're actually in a very ancient forest, or one that has been given many hundreds of years to recover. It also means if you see this on the forest floor, this is where the animal diversity will be the highest also, because it's the most diverse type of forest. So I have a few types. I have shoria, and you see they're all different, but same but different. Same, but that's this. This is a kuruing. The kuruing is wavy. And let me see. There's more. See, that's kuruing also. So let's see if you can see the differences. And I can't, I was going to say, for everyone who knows the most, you get a lifetime, free entrance to ArtScience Museum. But I can't promise that because I'm not in the staff, right? So I would, no, but I think there's 4 types. There's one called Hopia, which is Marawan. There's Shoria, which is Maranti. There's something called Kuruing, Dipterocarpus, and one last one called Anisoptera, and that one is called, I'm drawing a blank here. I won't make it up. I'll just consult. But there's 4 different types. I'll show you what the 4 are, and then I'll scatter them and see if you can sort them into the right genus. But again, I just want to thank you for coming down. I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. We have until a few minutes.
We can have a quick Q&A if there is anyone wants to ask Dr. Shawn a question. Anyone? Yes. Yeah,
Trinity.
pass the mic.
Oh, okay.
I want to ask about the regenerated forest.
Yes.
Is it more resilient or less resilient against rising temperature?
Oh, okay, that's a really good. So the question was, so the regenerating, the secondary forests, are they more or less resilient? So, okay, one way to tell is, so for example, we're going through a slight dry period. I mean, we had dry first half of September, then it got wet again the second, and now it's dry again. So what you will notice maybe is after about a week of no rain, some trees will start to wilt, and some will look very happy. And so and you'll notice if the dry period is prolonged, then you start to see tankers, right, with all the water and trying to water. But even that is not enough. So you actually start to see about 2-3 weeks of no rain, they start to brown, and some don't revive. And so with these regenerated, they're called pioneers, they're the fast-growing types. Some of them are actually quite drought resistant, but others grow fast, but they also take up a lot of water. So what we should probably find is it's not like the forest will just completely die or all die or all survive, but there'll probably be a few hardy ones that will do well, and then the others will sort of fall with excessive drought. They get pushed beyond what historically they might have become adapted to. And so what we would probably find is a reduced diversity. For most of us, the forest will still look like a forest. I mean, it still will be a forest, and it may be indistinguishable, but if you look carefully, it might have fewer species in them. So both the primary and secondary, there are some that are more water needy, and others that are a little bit more stingy with the water, and those are the ones that will thrive. And again, I do think that this should be studied a little bit more, because we're doing this one. Wouldn't it be ironic? No, people are doing this. We have a 1 million trees program, so we plant 1 million trees, but they turn out not to be sort of future-proof because they're the sensitive types. So we plant 1 million, but then 900,000, we lose because of the drought. It won't happen. This won't be broadcast, I hope, publicly. No. No, but I think the idea is, as we have this opportunity, since we're planting, we can, in a way, future-proof our city by maybe in some of these areas where we really need shade, where we really need that cooling effect of trees to keep the city just a little bit more livable, really pick the more drought-tolerant ones there that we know, even if the climate changes, they still will be there 20, 30, 50 years from now. So I think that's ongoing research, Trinity, and I think it's really important because it's not just about trees, but it's also about comfort and therefore quality of life. Yeah, thank you.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Shawn. I think there are so much things that you can talk about the forest and can go on and on, but I think we have to wrap up soon. I think we'll be sticking around, so if you do have questions for Dr. Shawn, you can just mingle around and he'll be around here, and you can stick around to do that little activity that Shawn. So for those who, thank you again for joining us this evening. So if you have a chance to see the exhibition, please do so. It still opens until the end of the month, 29th of October. So please check out Sensory Odyssey into the Heart of the Living World. You will also see one of the videos of the different biodiversity experts, including Dr. Shawn's, in the exhibition as well. So please take some time and check out the exhibition. So I want to thank everyone again, and thank you, Dr. Shawn, for sharing with us this evening.
Thank you very much. I forgot to say, I also have some nutmegs. These are wild nutmegs. And can you see what they do? They're very clever. They hang like this. They split exactly in half, and then the seed is just there for the animal to come and take. So, but the seed is not, the seed is the seed, but the animal is actually after this orange part. So, you know, like the durian has that creamy part around the seed? So that's called an aril. But it's the stalk of this, okay, I know. If you have a pea, if you look at you open a pea pod, there's the pea, and there's the tiny little like stalk, very short little like filamentous thing. That's the connection between the fruit and the seed. So in most plants, it's just a little small little nubbin that just feeds the seed. But in some plants, that little piece starts to grow and become fleshy and surround the seed, and that's called the aril. So when we eat a durian, that's what we're eating. We're eating actually the seed stalk that's become fleshy. So in a nutmeg also has a fleshy seed stalk, and so you can take it off. And the animal is eating that part, and that's the seed part. So the animal will then, so what a monkey will do is stuff its mouth like this with just, and it's just like sungbui, it just sucks on the thing and it spits out the seed, and that's how the dispersal takes place. And now for the nutmeg that we eat, the cultivated nutmeg, the seed is ground, and that's the nutmeg powder. And then this aril is red in color, and that's sold as a separate spice called mace, which is also used for cooking savory things. So, yeah. So anyway, I have a bag of nutmegs if you want to have one type of wild nutmeg. Maybe I shouldn't say how I get these, but okay. I don't have the mic. Oh, I do have a mic. I'm being recorded. But have a look at the leaves. We can just take a look. Oh, okay, great. Okay. Thank you again.